Josh, absolutely delighted to see you here this morning at HDR's New York office on a beautiful sunny morning.
Thank you, Farah, for having me. I love coming to New York City in the spring and visiting HDR offices, and I especially love sitting down with all these subject matter experts today.
So, if I may begin with asking you, which factors do you believe are driving the adoption of building performance standards nationwide across North America?
That's a great question, Farah. North America building owners have been doing energy and carbon saving measures through more of a voluntary procedure over the years. But there's actually studies that have been shown that in order to reach the climate goals, residential building sector might take hundreds of years to get to those levels. And commercial buildings might take about 50 years. So really to get to that point that we need to, something had to be done. And that's where more policy-based energy and carbon opportunities had to take place. So building performance standards come about. Now, there are many different mechanisms for how building performance standards get adopted by a state or a municipality. And one of the things is just general climate action plans. A state or a municipality will draft and adopt a climate action plan that says, here where we are now, here's where we want to be by 2040 or 2050. What are the steps that we need to do to get there? And that's where a building performance standard comes in. It requires building owners to take action and reduce their energy and carbon. So all this is this trickle down from how are we going to get it from the state level or the municipal level or more local city level in order to save that energy and carbon. So moving from that voluntary to that policy is how they've shown that we're going to reach our goals by whether it's 2040, 2050, or whatever that threshold is.
Josh, thank you so much for that answer. And if I may say, your expertise comes across in volumes. Would you explain to the audience the different types of action plans with respect to building performance which are currently in place? And also, would you share the different hierarchy of policy regulations which currently exist at federal, state, and city level?
So there is a soon-to-be federal building performance standard that's only going to apply to state-owned and federal buildings. But you can have an individual state. For example, the state of Colorado has a building performance standard, but then also individual cities. So like the city of Denver. That doesn't mean that you only have to follow one. You actually, building owners have to follow all the requirements from every single tier. So that's really where an opportunity for HDR and that relationship of understanding all the ins and outs of building performance standards presents itself, so that we can help a client for the city of Denver. We can help a client with the state of Colorado. And that's going to be multiplied. What we have right now is increasing every single day. So while like New York City has a building performance standard right now, the state of New York will eventually have one. We know that. All states will eventually have building performance standards. And there's that hierarchy that we need to be able to help clients with.
Josh, do you really think penalties will play a role in financing energy enhancements and driving compliance in building performance standards?
No, it's such a hot topic question, and penalties have to be addressed because they're a key component to these building performance standards. Now, individual building performance standards across the United States are dealing with penalties in different ways. But the one commonality is that they've all addressed that they don't want to have to take these penalties. They want to help the building owners and provide pathways and mechanisms to using that money for energy and carbon retrofits as much as possible. But there are pathways where a penalty would result in. But to avoid that, individual municipalities and states have implemented things such as alternative compliance paths, delayed pathways, target adjustments. But take the instance for City of Denver. They have numerous alternative compliance paths in their Energize Denver program. If it gets to a point where a building owner has not done anything and not met any of their thresholds, they are subject to a civic penalty. And then with that civic penalty, they'll have another number of days, which Energize Denver will say, here's what you need to do. If you do this, the penalty goes away. Unfortunately, if they don't do that, that's when that penalty gets enabled. And if they don't pay that penalty, then there's even the chance for a lien to go on a property, which is another significant milestone.
Just for the sake of our global audience, would you explain how a lien on a property is applied?
That's a good question. A lien is essentially a penalty, a fine that is attached to the property, and it is maintains with the property until it's paid off or until a date of sale when it also has to be sold off. So a building owner cannot have a final sale on a building without either A, closing out the lien and paying, or having the new owner take ownership of that lien, knowing that that also has to be paid off in the future too. So it's more attached to a future bill of sale of a property.
And following on from that previous answer, Josh, can you now explain how different cities are applying penalties?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a really unique building performance standard that's implemented is how Boston does it. So Boston has a pathway to achieving compliance of you actually pay a social cost of carbon. Essentially, it's an alternative compliance path that if a building owner cannot meet their greenhouse gas emissions target, they can pay the differential in metric tons to achieve that target. And that's about $238 per metric ton right now. So this alternative compliance pathway money goes into this equity investment fund. And I bring up equity because that's such a key component when municipalities are designing how building performance standards work. Whenever you have a policy-based system that requires building owners to make change to their energy and carbon profiles, that costs money. And that's going to start to create inequalities. So equity and social equity is a huge component of building performance standards because there's so many benefits that building performance standards can bring. Obviously, it saves energy, it saves carbon, it saves operating costs, but it also improves the human health of buildings, not only in the buildings, but also the community. By not having the ability for certain building types, such as low-income housing, religious worships houses, of being able to take advantage of building performance standards because they don't have the funding, this equity investment fund goes full circle and allows those building types and those owners to use that funds to implement building performance standards retrofits. So it's a really great full circle opportunity, and it really helps balance out the inequity that a potential building performance standard could provide.
Josh, a fascinating answer on equity investment funds. And this leads me to ask you, can you define the key parameters with respect to carbon, human health, social equity, and perhaps share your thoughts on human health in particular?
Absolutely. At the end of the day, when building performance standards save energy and carbon, which also has the potential to save operating costs, but one of the big parameters is that we're getting rid of fossil fuels at the building, and then we're also reducing electric generation at the power plant. Now, if you look at an individual building, what happens when you get rid of natural gas? You eliminate particulates, you eliminate the products of combustion, and all of these things are contributing to human health in the building. So think of this in like the little bubble, that we are improving human health for communities, for residences, for schools, for all these different types. There's actually been numerous studies that the products of natural gas contribute towards asthma in kids. So this electrification movement has many benefits. And then if you think a little bit bigger, at the power plant level, we're eliminating power generation. So just this morning on the news, I saw that the state of New York is imposing new regulations on coal power plants to reduce emissions. But building performance standards have the potential to reduce power generation to the point where we could even turn off those coal power plants. That's the goal. We're getting more opportunities for clean power. Those coal power plants and other power generation facilities are polluting communities, and that's at a larger state level, a national level scale. So all this has the potential to really reduce and improve human health numerous times over.
Josh, drawing upon global experiences from across HDR and specifically from London where I work, recent studies are showing that 70% of current projects are actually refurbishment and retrofits compared to only 30% of new builds. Can you share any notable challenges that you may encounter as we take our clients on a journey to achieving carbon reductions?
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. We have very similar stats too. So every new construction building is only a small percentage of the entire building stock. And that holds true in New York City even more so. And there are challenges and there are hurdles to building performance standards, and electrification, that getting rid of fossil fuels, is going to be a big one. Now, it's not just electrification. It's not just getting rid of all the natural gas and putting in electric resistance coils. It's beneficial electrification. And why we add that keyword beneficial is because we need the new design to save carbon. It needs to be high performance, high energy and carbon savings. And to do that, there's a variety of technologies that we look at during the retrofit. Not every building is going to be a drop-in style building where you can just replace system A with system B and you're done. New York City is a huge example of that, where a lot of the buildings are fed by a district steam system. That will be reduced greater and greater as building performance standards become more prevalent. And these buildings have to improve their carbon profile by getting rid of steam, which is generated by fossil fuels. So we have to look at these individual buildings from the design perspective and use the power of design, use the power of energy analytics, and have that data inform the design. Look at alternatives for heat recovery chillers, for different heat pump opportunities to really optimize that building and convert it from that fossil fuel, from that district steam, into that beneficial electrified building that relies on great heat pump technology, is passive, has reduced the facade energy so that the internal loads of the building are lower. So everything is smaller, more right-sized. You have that tipping points. As you optimize the building, things start to operate better, operate more efficiently. Systems get smaller. And then when you're adding renewable energy systems, which a lot of buildings are going to be doing here, that system is smaller because you've already right-sized the other systems upstream of that. And that's a really key point in order to get rid of fossil fuels. It's not just about putting in the new heat pump or putting renewables. You have to optimize the building first. Look at the envelope, look at the lighting, look at the schedule of use and the controls. All these things come together to form that perfect carbon reduced building.
Josh, as we conclude our interview this morning, please would you share with our global audience the prevailing trends that you believe the real estate sector will draw upon?
Absolutely. I love that question. And two ideas come to mind. And the first is the power of data. And data was really the heart of how building performance standards got started. It was, the first step was always for building owners to submit benchmarking data and have that data available under the adage that you can't manage what you don't measure. So building owners who maybe hadn't measured their building in the past would be able to see, oh, here's what I have to do, and maybe here's what I can do to make change. That was pre-building performance standards, before they had to make implementations. Post-implementation, the goal is to maintain those savings. The last thing we want is to have energy drift, where you have an energy savings, and all of a sudden it starts to tail off. That's called energy drift, and we use a lot of different mechanisms to prevent that. One of my favorites is fault detection diagnostics, using the Internet of Things to really take advantage of big data. And how that consists of is about every 5 minutes we're sending data up to cloud-based algorithms or site-based infrastructure to find those anomalies, to avoid that drift and assure we maintain those savings through the longevity of the building. So big data is going to be an increasingly key trend that we see. Now, the second, new construction. There's going to be numerous CRE assets that are brought online through design and new construction. And I can't help but think that we can use building performance standards to help us in that process. So during design, we know that after the ribbon cutting of this building, it will become an existing building. And after 12 months of operation, that building will have to follow the regulations of the building performance standards. So we can use building performance standards requirements and the policy as our crystal ball. We know what's going to happen. We know what thresholds we have to get to. We can prove that we can get there with our designs for these new construction buildings that will be subject to compliance with the building performance standards at a later date. That's how we use building performance standards to really work for us as our future telling crystal ball to help us. And that's going to improve the asset class. That's going to improve numerous planning strategies for the CRE team as they move forward to work with building performance standards in the future.
Thank you. Josh, it's been amazing talking with you this morning here in New York City. Thank you so much for making the time.
No, thank you for having me, Farah. I love being in the New York City atmosphere and answering these questions that are just really I'm passionate about. So thank you so much.